Good evening, friends. It is such a pleasure for me always. I grew up in Bombay, and till my age of uh, 35, not even earlier, I grew up in this city. I studied here, and you will be amazed that this museum used to be one of the places where uh, our classes were held for masters by Dr. Moti Chandra. So I used to come here. It used to be a dark and dingy place. And later, many years later, when I came here, I couldn't even recognize the transformation that has happened during the last few years. And it has become India's topmost museum. So it's the pride of Bombay. I used to do the same return. And such a pleasure for me to be here. Devangana Ben, I've known her for years and years when I was doing my master's. And I remember when her first book, or at least one of the first important books on Khajuraho came out, and we used to have lots of discussions and things. And there was in Villeparle, there was a place in the house of Dilip Purohit where we used to have our baithaks every Sunday, and I used to be there quite often. And since then, my connection with Devangana Ben has continued all throughout. I've been reading all what she writes, and particularly related to the topic of today, I think Devangana Ben's contribution has been immense. So I'm very honored to do this lecture under the auspices of your endowment. Uh, Thirdly, the introduction that was done by Joyati, she has summarized better than I would for my own lecture, that she did put it so well with my interdisciplinarity and things like that, that I think I will take Joyati's help in future to write my summaries of my lecture. She did it so well. Thanks, Joyati. And Sabyasachi, I'm so thankful to you for doing this for me. I'll what I'll do is that I have two parts of my lecture. One is introduction to a topic which is uh, extremely, for my feeling, or should have been controversial, but has not become controversial in India so much because we have confined to some kind of canon, shastra to practice, as if every iconography we see comes from a certain shastric canon or things like that. It is not. And lifetime that after studying 4 years of ancient Indian art in St. Xavier's College in Bombay, where Cyrus used to also be a student. Uh, After that, I did anthropology and did huge field work in India for years and years in many regions of India. And I found out that there were loose links lying to what was Shastric, what is canonical. And this whole thing has brought me a different vision. Now, there won't be a possibility of one-to-one. That is, you see some folk rituals or mythology or things like that, and then you say, okay, it's not so. One to one is nothing. There's nothing one to one in 4,000-5,000 years of civilization. But I think there are many loose ends lying here and there, and my interest and job is to pick up these loose ends and connect, and not even claim that I connect that, but I think at least we make an endeavor. And therefore, I'm thankful for this subject to the team of young curators of this museum, with whom, as Mr. Mukherjee said, that we were involved in discussing the curation of the sculpture gallery. And this topic has emerged from my talk with the curators here, which I immensely enjoyed, their engagement, their interest, their enthusiasm. So I'm very happy that you have the team of people who are very interested and were very open. So I was inspired to do this topic, which I haven't been working on ancient Indian art directly as such, though I studied that for years and years. I feel that those meetings have been of great importance. Now, my talk is two parts. One is uh, introductory, which I will quickly read, not to spend too much time, and then go to a second part that is directly related to Durga, Mahishamardini, and Ambika, and Kali trampling upon Shiva. So I read initially the first portion. Uh, I read slow enough, but still read to not to spend too much time on that. My talk this evening is in the purview of the newly curated sculpture gallery at CSMVS and may be seen at one level within that framework, but more importantly, I would like to raise questions with regard to the fixed and founded canonical view of myths and iconographies and recontextualize the study in the framework of a broader theory of iconology. I'll tell you what is iconology, taking into account the processes of centuries-old cultural diffusion which led to the emergence of not only the regional myths and rituals and iconographies, but even the so-called canon. Now, why I'm going into, you see, iconography, graphy is the visual part of it, an image. And we have been stuck for years and years with that visual part. That is, we say Vishnu, so everyone say Shankha Chankra Gada Padma, Vishnu. Like that, but that we know, it is mentioned. But what about many other things that are not canonized? And let's not forget that it's not so that canon came first and practice came afterward. This is now well known, enough material we have to understand that. So iconology is an area which brings an icon into a cultural perspective, larger cultural perspective of mythology, a perspective of mythology, stories, living rituals, going backwards. Mythologies are not directly datable, but they have ancient elements. So all this put together, and if we build a framework, and I understand that in a gallery like that, we cannot put that in every caption, but what we can do is put in the gallery text the broader vision of the thing. Otherwise, we remain too confined, and for generations we say, "Oh, Kali, these are her attributes. Vishnu, these are that." This we have done for decades. So I want to expand the field in which these can be contextualized. So, and I'll take these 2-3 examples of Mahishamardini and Ambika and Kali trampling upon Shiva. So, what I mean by this is to move away from the simplistic view of parity between an established Brahmanic literary canon and the iconographies as cause and effect, but place the latter in the wider context of regional myths and rituals which have strong kinship with the constituted canon. This kinship is not necessarily in the form of cause and effect. It's not causal relationship, canon to practice, shastra to prayoga. It's not so. But this we have been carrying in us. So I would like to draw attention with my examples to some of these things. Both the so-called canonical and art historical conceptualizations of iconographies of Hindu, Buddhist or Jain deities did not emerge in a fixed and founded form at any given point of history, which we have been carrying on for many years. Iconographies of deities and the yakshas and yakshinis have evolved varyingly from time to time or place to place. As we shall see in some cases, the constituted canon, the constructed canon, precedes iconographies. Often it happens that the canon comes afterwards, and whole shastric, but it's totally based on the practice which is much earlier. And Ambika would be one of the best examples, as I will show you in a while. While in other cases, the canon is constituted subsequently based on the prevalent practices or pre-existing myths, rituals, or actual images. Moreover, the question is, what does one call a canon? There's this word, what is the equivalent in India? So everyone says shastrik. So shastrik, and therefore they say, oh, classical dance. So shastrik. So shastrik has become a word for canonical or canon. But canons can be also established through a certain practice. There is a certain practice going on for certain decades and centuries, and that also establishes the canon. So, what is that way canon? So I feel how it came to our writing of art history. The question is, what does one call a canon? The idea of canon in the sense of a rule or a principle, mainly in the sense of Christian ecclesiastical decree, apparently entered the Indian art history during its early colonial writing and had emerged from the imaginary Hindu equivalent, mainly the Shastras, meaning any Brahmanic text pertaining to Hindu art and architecture. Now, what happened was that early Greco-Roman art or Greek art, Roman art, etc., there were certain canons, principles of human body, etc. I won't go into that, but we know that. And there were canons, and then later on, Christianity had certain established canons of, so Renaissance was quite dominated by that. So in India, when early colonial times, European art historians were working in India, they were looking for some kind of canon from which this art stems. It was not wrong, I'm saying. It was certainly important, but we got stuck only and we are moving there alone, leaving out the other material which is practiced and which influences millions of other people outside the Brahmanic fold. And that, I think, a subject which we have left out. Moreover, what happened, it was in the 19th century, in the era of Enlightenment, 18th century in Europe and later on here, that the science of anthropology came up. And there was beginning of looking at other material which pertain to much larger communities, the rituals, etc., much larger communities, but we confine only to certain Brahmanic things. And there, I think I want to bring all this and contextualize in this larger material as such. Brahmanic texts pertaining to Hindu art, this established a belief in one-way traffic, namely from Shastra to Prayoga, or from principle to practice. This worked in some cases, but most often it happened that the prevalent practice without any sanctified text preceding it itself formed the canon, because long-going practice becomes a canon. For example, the case of the Ambika Devi or Yakshi in Jainism, as well as we shall see in a while. That's one of the themes of my talk today. Interestingly, consorts as Parvati or Sita rarely have definite iconographic marks and are identified as such on account of their pairing with their male consorts such as Shiva, Rama, respectively. On the other hand, independent goddesses such as Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga, Kali, Chamunda, etc., they all have male, Chamunda, etc., or the male deities such as Shiva, Vishnu, Rama are defined by their lanchanas or the attributes and mudras that we all know, especially in their worship images and have their own iconographic conception. This all is known, established through studies in Indian iconography. Often a whole narrative related to a deity is condensed into a compact, often a whole narrative related to a deity is condensed into a compacted iconographic whole. So description, whole myth is compacted into one image, and that is iconized, the description. For example, the conception of Durga Mahishamardini. We know the story of Durga Mahishamardini. The whole story, the buffalo, she killing the buffalo, all that is compacted into one image. So it's a narrative which is compacted into a single image, which is different than Vishnu, his Shankha, Chakra, Gada and Padma and standing. There's different, there's no narrative in there. Here, there is a whole story of Durga is compacted into one icon. Durga Mahishamardini, wherein the entire myth of the goddess and the buffalo is synopsized into a single image. The same is the case with some of the images of Ambika or Varaha and Prithvi. Now, Varaha and Prithvi is on the right side, you can see. Now, it looks like one icon, but actually the entire story of Varaha and Prithvi, that how Haranyaksha flings Prithvi into the primordial waters, and then that Varaha, as of the incarnation of Vishnu, brings the Prithvi out. So that whole thing is compacted into. So there are two types. One is a single image with certain lanchanas, and then there are images which are compacted into it. So Durga Mahishama, even Ambika's story, as we will see later on, is also compacted in, a whole story is compacted into it. So there is a narrative into it. Even such things we have rarely been differentiating when we do iconographic studies. Often a whole narrative related to a date. Another introductory observation. Next, please. Yeah. Wait. I lost thread. Can you give me that? Yeah. Another introductory observation that I wish to make is that there are certain pre-existing molds from which a group of deities are cast, and with slight variations and individualities constructed. For example, matrikas or mother goddesses in many regions are seated females having a child on their left lap. Often female counterparts of certain male gods are conceptualized based on a couple of lanchanas or lakshanas of their male consorts. For example, the iconographies of Indrani, as you can see in the images, Indrani, Vaishnavi, Bhairavi, Varahi, etc. Their particularly their head, or sometimes even the vehicles that they have, these are all related to their male counterpart. So these iconographies are constructed as female counterpart, but basically based on their male conceptualization. Besides these so-called canonized forms, there is a whole range of regional myths, iconographies, and ritual practices around some of the deities which are common to both the canonical and sub-canonical or the living folk practices and iconographies. The latter are not necessarily deviates or apabhransha. They are not necessarily deviates or apabhransha of a Sanskrit original, but are deeply rooted in the regional myths and rituals, and it is not unlikely that historically some of the so-called canon itself is formed incorporating this. There's no doubt. Ambika's story, for example, that the first canonical reference is 14th century, the story, but already 5th and 6th century in Akota, you find complete iconography, which is a narrative which comes into 14th century canon, written canon. Before that, there are no stories except at various folk levels, as has been also pointed out by Kumud Kanitkar in her wonderful paper. Instead of getting entangled in the chicken and egg circularity of what came first, the principle or the practice, meaning the canon shastra or actual practical tradition prayoga, it would be more pertinent to deal with each individual myth and iconography within its broader canonical as well as regional cultural context. Regional cultural contexts are completely lost, but go anywhere and see all over India. The ritual pertaining to Mahishamardini are so living and so deep-rooted, and even sometimes you find elements of what we call classical existing here, but in a different form. We can't say that this is just derived from the canon. That means everything has come from Sanskrit classical and got into a local percolated. This will be politically also incorrect, and particularly in today's political context, it is not right to leave aside 80% of India's population as not contributing to the collective culture that grew in this country, and that to only concentrate on Brahmanic texts and all. I'm not undermining or demeaning Brahmanic texts and all. The great importance, because they are very sort of organized and very sophisticated and put together, intellectually refined and think, but at the same time, I think we have to look at the living material too. Instead of getting entangled, I said this, historical evidence shows that none of the myths and iconographies were apaurushaya. I want to come to this term. Iconographies were apaurushaya, but emerged from given cultural historical conditions. What is apaurushaya? For example, people say, or scholars say, and it's known, that Rigveda is apaurushaya, meaning was not created by human being, but it was coming from elsewhere. So it was sort of given by, by gods, or so to say. But so apaurushaya. Now, can any iconography be apaurushaya given by God, or does it evolve within a cultural context over decades and centuries? Now, even this simple thing, we all know what I'm saying is nothing new. But why in our practice of teaching, curatorial practices, why we do not bring this in, somehow, and how we have marginalized completely this thing. And some scholars have done extraordinary work on this, which I will come to. In this broad background, now that introduction part is over, now in this background, I propose to examine the conflated iconographies, myths and rituals of the motifs of the goddess killing the buffalo, that of the goddess Yakshi, or even Shalapanjika. Devangana will question me, but I still mention it. The goddess Yakshi, Shalapanjika, Ambika, as well as of Kali, trampling upon her consort Shiva. Most difficult iconography, and therefore we brush it aside. Tantric. Everything is said tantric. No, we have to explain it through some material. Let's start with the myths of the goddess and the buffalo, with special reference to the theme of the goddesses. Now look, I'm bringing a new element, and don't be shocked. Let's start with the myth of the goddess and the buffalo, with special reference to the theme of the goddess's infatuation for the buffalo. You see, Devi Mahatmya, the classical text would say that it was the demons who were infatuated and proposed for marriage. But go into entire Tamilian classical landscape, Andhra landscape, and many other, entire Gujarat and all, where I have done a lot of field work. I find that there are innumerable stories, Maharashtra also, innumerable stories of the goddess's infatuation for the buffalo and conjugality and conjugal relationship. Now, can we discard these myths which are so widespread? It was D.D. Kosambi who drew our attention for the first time, and he did Maharashtra work. And there was a German scholar called G.D. Sondheimer. He did extraordinary work in Maharashtra. Poor fellow, he died young. He spoke Marathi fluently, and he could even abuse in Marathi. That means his knowledge was so deep. And he did so much field work, and he was following the line. But Kosambi once said that the material that he has brought from Maharashtra should exist in other parts of India. And taking a clue from that, I think it was the greatest of the great scholars of our time, David Schulman. He wrote a book called Tamil Temple Myths. And there he has collected myths of the goddess and the conjugal relationship of the goddess and the buffalo, which exists in Maharashtra in many parts. I'll refer to it briefly and think. But I think I want to draw. Now I understand when you do a gallery or you put Durga icons, you cannot caption this material. But in a gallery text, I think we can go beyond only what is classically accepted. And I think that would be like a new step in museum curating of ancient Indian art, etc. And to bring in this, not that you give this is that example for that is a different thing. But I think to give knowledge to people who come to see the gallery, about the broad field. Let's start with the myth of the goddess and the buffalo, with special reference to the theme of the goddess' infatuation for the buffalo, her wedding with him in some myths, and his identification with Shiva himself in another. So many myths are there. And while doing this, I shall take into account the following sources. So my, yeah. Okay. So, uh, while doing this, I shall take into account the following sources: Devi Mahatmya, the Sanskrit canonical myth, then the Tamil Sthala Puranas, the local Puranas of temples, which go back to at least 17th century, and in oral form even earlier, but composed in published form to 17th century. So Sanskrit canonical myth, the Tamil Sthala Purana, as studied by David Schulman. In my opinion, one of the greatest Indologists, particularly Tamil studies of our time, is David Schulman. Tremendous knowledge both of living practices and classical Tamil and Sanskrit. An important documentation of myths and rituals from the Telugu country by Henry Whitehead. You'll be amazed that Henry Whitehead, 125 years ago, he wrote a book called Village Gods of South India. And it's a small book. What a field work he has done, and particularly with reference to goddess in the buffalo and their conjugality and things like that, and the sacrifices related to that. He's documented very, very interesting. My attention to this was drawn to this book. I knew the book, but I didn't have a copy because it was Jagdish Mittal, the art historian, who once, as a surprise, sent a gift to me, this book, which was so rare to get, and I got the myth from that. But Schulman has also referred to Henry Whitehead more than a century ago. The folk myth, third is the folk myths, rituals, and iconographies from Deccan, as explored by D.D. Kosambi and G.D. Sontheimer from Heidelberg in Germany. He died young. He was so committed that he had nothing in his life, no interest, just be all the time in the field and writing and documenting. And extraordinary man, died very early. And those from Western India, other stories from Western India, as collected by myself in several years of field work in Gujarat and Rajasthan. So with this material, I will broaden the field of Mahishamardini. Let us first look at the Hindu canonical story of the goddess killing Mahishasura and other demons, and then comparatively examine the vernacular regional myths of the goddess in the buffalo. Now, this one which I'm going to talk about, Devi Mahatmya, you know, so I'll quickly read through. The most formidable Sanskrit story is that of the Devi Mahatmya, the 6th century AD, of the Markandeya Purana, which starts with the archetypal Hindu motif of the conflict between the Devas and Asuras, in which in the first part the goddess kills the demon Madhu and Kaitaba, in the second part Mahisha, and in the third part Raktabija, Chandamunda and Shumba Nisumba. Devi Mahatmya says, while killing Mahisha, the goddess jumped and landed herself on the great Asura, and pressing her foot, which you find in most iconography, the foot actually is shown on his neck. Foot on his throat, struck him with a spear, thereupon trampled upon under her foot. The Asura half issued issued forth from his buffalo mouth in his real human form. The goddess cut off his head with her great sword. In Hindu living rituals, we don't have this, but in large number of folk and tribal rituals, even today, you have the manner in which the buffalo is killed. And the story of buffalo's conjugal relationship with this exists. And actually, I have in Gujarat and Rajasthan documented and taken photographs, which I will show you, that it sounds like enacting Devi Mahatmya in a way, but it's obviously not, because they don't even know a word of Sanskrit. The most formidable, yeah. So Devi Mahatmya says that Nishikesh. Devi Mahatmya further says, but from his stricken body the blood flowed profusely. Chamunda licked it with her mouth. It says Devi Mukhena, with her mouth, Jagrahe sucked Rakta Bijasya Shonitam. Devi sucked the blood of Rakta Bija from her mouth. Now, this doesn't exist in Hindu ritualism, but widespread in many parts of country. This ritual is even existent today. Since there is a ban on this, it is done secretly, but still it does exist. Okay, thanks for changing without. I always forget. In Devi Mahatmya, the various demons enchanted by the goddess makes proposal of marriage to her. That we all know. That let us now contextualize the Sanskrit canonical story in the broad spectrum of the living regional vernacular myths spread all over the Indian subcontinent. As described by Henry Whitehead, I mentioned that little book 125 years ago, Whitehead was working there, and analysis by David Schulman. The male god in many South Indian villages is still often a buffalo king, Poturaju in Andhra areas. So Poturaju is the buffalo king, even today, in Andhra areas. Sometimes now look at this. Sometimes he is the husband of the goddess in the sacrificial ritual. In the Telugu country, a buffalo is ritually married to the goddess, and this buffalo is designated as Gaudakona, which in Telugu, which means husband buffalo. So the buffalo is ritually married to the goddess. So Telugu, again I repeat this, in the sacrificial ritual in the Telugu country, a buffalo is ritually married to the goddess. This buffalo is designated as the Gaudakona or husband buffalo, and after the sacrifice of the buffalo, the wedding ceremony is repeated with a new buffalo to let the goddess not remain a widow. So, this is a living ritual. And Whitehead 100 years ago, but at least Schulman has endorsed it and seen it also, and he finds parallel in Tamil temple myths. The sacrifice of the goddess's consort is explained. Why sacrifice of the goddess's consort? The sacrifice of the goddess's consort is explained by a Telugu myth as recorded by Whitehead. According to it, a lower caste man fraudulently married an upper caste Brahmin girl who, on realizing the truth, committed suicide by putting her own house on fire, because she didn't know, and the Brahmin posed, the scheduled caste man posed as a Brahmin man. On account of her virtue of expiation of the sin of marrying an outcast, expiation by killing herself, marrying an outcast, she appears in the village in her divine form as Uramma, a local goddess. The village goddess, and tells the villagers that, this horrible picture taken 125 years ago. According to it, the lower caste man fraudulently marries an upper caste Brahmin girl who, on realizing the truth, commits suicide by putting her own house on fire. On account of her virtue of expiation of the sin of marrying an outcast, she appears in the village in her divine form as Uramma, the village goddess, and tells the villagers that as per her dying wish, the villagers should behead her husband in front of her and sever his leg and put it in his mouth, which is a sign of humbling. Many people would know that humbling in India, in villages and elsewhere traditionally, that you put a blade of grass in your mouth, tinka, and then fall at the feet of a person to say that you are so humbled. Now there's a reflection of that here. Severing his leg and put it in his mouth and place the fat on of his stomach on his head. This in the next this is exactly in the same fashion as buffalo is sacrificed in the region. So she wanted her husband to be killed in that manner. The manner is how buffalo is killed in the region. In the next birth, uh, in the next birth, the husband is reborn as buffalo. So the husband is reborn as buffalo, which is sacrificed to the village goddess in the same manner as killing her pariah husband. Ever since a buffalo is sacrificed to the goddess periodically. I shall come back to this story as conflated with that of Ambika in a while. As pointed out by David Schulman in the, I don't know if you know the book, it's a classic Tamil temple myths, and he was a professor for years in Chicago University, but also in Jerusalem University. As pointed out by David Schulman in the Tamil Arunachal Puranam, 17th century Arunachal Purana, the Devi Parvati commanded Durga to kill Mahisha, which she did. But as she took the decapitated head of the buffalo, she found a crystal linga hanging in his neck. This is that 17th century Tamil Purana. The phallus symbol of Shiva worn in his neck. Mahisha, as the bearer of the linga, is said to partake of Shiva's own form, and it is the murder of Shiva himself which is implicitly attributed to Devi, for which, in that Purana, for which she had to undertake expiation. So she had to go to Arunachalam and be sorry about it and to do expiation, so to say. I have recorded, now this is Schulman and thing, I have recorded several myths and myths pertaining to the motif of conjugality between the goddess and the buffalo in some goddess and the buffalo in some form or the other in Western India, but due to shortage of time, I shall briefly refer to only one story. It's a longish story. There are many stories. Why I'm saying many? Because it is widespread. It's not a singular, exceptional example on which I am building this. And this is Western Indian example. Maharashtra, already I told you that there are stories. And then Tamil and then Andhra. In 1980, I documented an astonishing myth of the Wagri community of Gujarat in a village near Ahmedabad, wherein the goddess is depicted as deeply enamored of a young buffalo to the extent of being unfaithful to her consort Mahadeva. No, previous. Yeah, just leave it there. Now the story that I recorded is like this. Once upon a time, Mahadeva or Shiva and Parvati were roaming around the earth, riding their bull vehicle. Passing by a pond, they came across a young lustrous buffalo struggling to survive. Next. Okay. Passing by a pond, they came across a young lustrous buffalo struggling to survive. Parvati asked, now look at this, very interesting. I will record a tape recorder. Parvati asked Mahadev to bring the buffalo back to life. Now look what Shiva says. Knowing well Parvati's infatuation for the buffalo, Mahadev refused to accede to her wish. As Parvati was adamant, Mahadev rejuvenated the buffalo using his magical weapons kept in his matted hair, on a condition that she would not take him along. As both continued their journey on their bull vehicle, Parvati turned back and gestured the buffalo to follow. She said, "You won't take it together, but to follow." On their way, they decided to take a rest in a cave. You can see here. Rest in a cave. As the buffalo and the Shiva's bull, Nandi, and the buffalo were grazing together, the bull repeatedly kicked the buffalo because he was loyal to Shiva. So the bull repeatedly kicked the buffalo, preventing him from eating the grass, showing his loyalty to Shiva. As the starving buffalo got sick and emaciated, Parvati secretly, look, she cheats upon Shiva. Parvati secretly removed the magical weapons from Mahadev's matted hair to revitalize, which Shiva had done himself earlier. So now, she put the weapons on the demon, on buffalo, on the buffalo. Removed the magical weapons from Mahadev's matted hair to revitalize it. As soon as Parvati put the weapons on the buffalo's head, he turned into an enormous demon and told I've shortened it. His horns pierced the sky. His feet went into the underworld and covered all the three worlds and came jumping to Shiva and turned into enormous demon and told Mahadev to give Parvati in marriage to him or give him a fight. So he says that you give me your wife in marriage to me or give me a fight. As Mahadev's magical weapons were now with demon, so now demon becomes Shiva in a way. His power is transferred to the demon, to the buffalo. So as Mahadev's magical weapons were now with the demon, Mahadev was helpless. He created a creature from his body dirt, and put life into the buffalo. Gave him Damru, Shiva's drum. Damru, the two-headed tension drum, which known as Damru, offered a four-headed. In the meanwhile, a bridegroom came to marry Parvati. He came, who offered a forehead mark. Next, please. But now you see here, this I bought. This textile piece is a large piece. We narrate this textile piece and this story, and I got this piece about 45 years ago, but it was old and was being used in the ritual. So at least it is 75 years old, the textile that I have. People would even date it to 80, 85, but I think 75 would be roughly the date when this was made. An entire story is illustrated in that. So he turned into an enormous demon and told Mahadev to give Parvati in marriage to him or give him a fight. As Mahadeva's magical weapons were now with the demon, Mahadev was helpless. He created a creature from his body dirt, gave him the Damru, his own Damru, and asked him to go and wake up Shakti. Can you go back to the... Now Shakti is sleeping on top of the cave where Mahadev is seated, helpless Mahadev, and she is in centuries of slumber. So she's deep asleep, and you see snakes have made snake holes and things around her. So she's just asleep. And on the right side you can see, and left side also, that Shiva had created these humans from his body dirt and had put life into them and gave his own Damru. So they are waking her up because she's sleeping over hundreds of years, so it's difficult to wake her up. So they are trying to wake her up. And asked her that Mahadev was in trouble and needed her help. In the meanwhile, the buffalo, decked up as bridegroom, came to marry Parvati. Now, here. Parvati, who offered a forehead mark as a symbolic act of accepting him as husband. In this borrowed time, Shakti with her goddesses appeared and attacked the buffalo with a trident, but could not kill him as he still possessed Mahadev's magical weapons. This is a little bit more related to Tamilian myths also, that the demon acquires the powers of Shiva. So he becomes Shiva. He had his crystal linga, etc. So he becomes Shiva for a while. In this borrowed time, Shakti with other goddesses appeared. One of the goddesses tricked him to snatch away the weapons. The demon then was reduced to a normal buffalo who was killed by the goddess. Let me now show you a few visuals of the ritual enactment of sacrifice of the buffalo bridegroom that was observed by me in a village near Ahmedabad between 1970s and 80s. Now, why I'm showing this is that look, it is not something as people would think that the classical myths are older and this and that. These rituals are deeply rooted. We cannot date the myth because it's an oral myth. But after all, there are such illustrations and all. Where do they come from? Is there any parallel of that in Indian sculpture or painting? No. So that means there is an ongoing tradition. If you can't date the actual material, but the deep-rootedness of the myth and the deep-rootedness of the ritual does say something is going on for a long time. Yeah. So here, as you can see, shamans dressed up as goddesses holding tridents and weapons. So these are male shamans, but at the moment they are possessed by goddesses and therefore they are female, which is all over India, the convention that the male is possessed by the goddess and then at that moment then on the left side on top you see the bridegroom buffalo, what we also saw in the painting. On the right side also his buffalo demon is there. And then this possessed one with the goddess holding goddess's trident is jumped at the buffalo and the buffalo is seen over there. And on the right side he just attacks almost like in sculptural depictions of Devi Mahatmya. Okay, the demon then was reduced to a normal buffalo who was killed, etc. Let me now show you. So next, this also another thing that a change is coming slowly, politically and social hierarchy. So in Gujarat, particularly Vaishnavas and Jain, very predominant. So there is a movement of converting these people into vegetarianism. So it's a contemporary context. So they are asked not to offer buffalo sacrifice, etc. So there is a curtain being held. And Louis Dumont, who wrote so much on Indian caste system, etc., he had talked a lot about prevalence of this curtain to be held even in Tamil Nadu and other parts of India to separate the two, not to pollute the vegetarian. Now, this is related to two brothers who lived next door to each other, and one brother was converted and therefore vegetarianism. Left side, you see the blood of the buffalo still lying there in front of the shrine, and that one is all now, instead of buffalo, they are offering vegetarian offerings to the deity. Next page. Yeah, and then it's very interesting that the recently turned vegetarians, they make a buffalo from wheat flour. So the belief and the memory prevails, then cuts that, and the man drinks ghee instead of blood. So in the other one, blood is drank. But it is, so how cultural traits continue to prevail. And it's the job of scholars or anthropologists or whoever to trace these elements back to whatever this we don't do in our work. And I think there's so much material, like it will perish, it will disappear, whereas these things will disappear, sculptures will not disappear so soon. So there's an urgency to do that kind of documentation. Okay. Now, I shall briefly discuss the conflated iconography of Kali trampling upon Shiva Mahishasura. Until now, this iconography has been brushed aside as tantric. No great convincing explanation comes. So people say it is tantric. Now, I was working in Saurashtra, Kathiawad in Gujarat, and parts of borderline Gujarat, Rajasthan. And I found there are picture showmen, storytellers, who have picture scroll, like you see on your left side, long scroll, maybe 4 meters or something, and many stories are depicted in various registers, as you see here. Then I pursued, then I wrote a paper also on them many years ago, but I pursued them and I found many of these picture showmen had this detail in their scroll. So not it's just one-off. And what is shown here and what is, see, right side we know this known iconography, the Kali trampling upon Shiva, and everyone says it's tantric. What does it mean tantric? If you say tantric, you won't explain anything. So I found some explanation in this, and as I said in the beginning, that it's not that the folk mythology would just take anything and put anything anywhere. It would be very unfair. They also have their structured life, ritualism, everything. So here what I saw was that Kali in the lowest register, she's trampling upon Shiva. Now, if right side is Shiva, Kali is trampling upon, then this side also is in a way Shiva. But you see on the left side of Kali, there is decapitated buffalo. So the head is fallen down, and from the buffalo head, what issued was the human, and that if that one is Shiva, then this one too is Shiva. And then we have seen so many myths that buffalo's relationship to Shiva in Maharashtra, in Tamil Purana, in Andhra, in Gujarat. So I think this is an interesting explanation. As I said right in the beginning, it's not that this is what it is, but I'm saying this is related material in any case. We have to explore it. It may not work, but we can't just brush it aside. All this will vanish. Now this tradition on the left side, picture showman, I did 25 years ago. Now I can't find anybody, though I collected about 20 picture scrolls from different showmen going around, and I purchased from them. And I find these iconographies. So, okay. So so this I have explained, so need not read out. In the left image, she is trampling upon the anthropomorphic Mahisha, the demon who ensued from the decapitated body of the buffalo. If the reclining male figure in the right image is that of Shiva, on whom Kali is trampling, by implication, the corresponding figure in the left picture too should be that of Shiva. Why should she be trampling upon any else, and there is no such as a reference? These images, in a way, become a key to understand, the complex iconography of Kali trampling upon Shiva, wherein it becomes clear that Kali is trampling upon the buffalo demon with whom Shiva is identified. Durga is Kali in a way. Considering the fact that in several myths quoted earlier from, can I take 15 minutes more? 10 minutes? Yeah. Considering the fact that in several myths quoted earlier from the Tamil region, from Maharashtra and from Gujarat, it becomes apparent that the buffalo or Mahisha often partakes the form of Shiva, whom the goddess kills or tramples upon, and then in some versions performs expiation for her act. As in the Arunachal Puranam mentioned earlier, Mahisha was a blessed devotee of Shiva who carried a crystal linga in his neck. In the Gujarat version, the buffalo obtains Mahadev's magical weapons. So some kind of Shiva's attributes coming into, or Shiva's powers coming into the buffalo. Magical weapons, and thereby become Shiva himself, legitimizing his demand to marry Parvati. As such, the final annihilation of the buffalo metaphorically becomes emblematic of Shiva's extermination, as in the iconography of Kali trampling upon Shiva. Now, my last Ambika part. Let me now, for this image, I am thankful to Kumud Kanitkar. I read her article. I didn't know her. I read her article. I was quite impressed by it. I contacted her and she provided this image to me. Thank you so much for this. Let me now end my talk with a partially conflated myths and iconography, myths and iconographies of the goddess Mahishamardini and those of the goddess Yakshi Ambika. According to the 14th century Jain canon Ambika Devi Kalpa by Jinaprabha Suri, the story of Ambika runs as follows. But 14th century, but 5th and 6th century Akota bronzes, you have complete, exactly the same iconization of the story. So it's not, and there is no other literary canon of this before Ambika Devi Kalpa. A Brahmin, now the story is, a Brahmin Soma lived in Saurashtra with his wife Ambika or Ambini with her 2 sons. Once on a day of his father's Shraddha, Soma's mother cooked a special meal for Brahmins to partake of it and went for a bath. Ambika, as she saw a Jain monk at the door begging for food after a prolonged fast, gave him a part of the festive food that was cooked in the house for Brahmins. Soma, seeing this as an act of pollution, because there was rivalry between Jains and Brahmins, and the Jains were considered lower to Brahmin. Soma, seeing this as an act of pollution, that giving Brahmins food to a Jain monk, Soma, seeing this as an act of pollution, became angry and threw Ambika and her 2 sons out of the house. As the sons became hungry and thirsty, and while she was passing by a dried up mango tree, you see, it's interesting. There's this conflation of Salabhanjika in a way. So, being as an act of pollution, okay. As the sons became hungry and thirsty, and while she was passing by a dried up mango tree, it came into full bloom with ripe mangoes, and a dried up pond also got filled up with water. Seeing his wife's miraculous powers, Soma rushed towards her. You can see this man left side standing over there. He rushes to her, then the 2 sons, and Ambika's trustworthy maid, and the lion vehicle, to which a reference will now come. As the sons became hungry, Soma rushed towards her to express remorse. Misunderstanding his approach as hostile, she jumped into a well along with her sons and died. Ambika was then reborn as a Yakshi of the Jain Tirthankara Neminatha, whose main shrine on Mount Girnar in Saurashtra, and this was a story of Saurashtra, and her husband was reborn as lion to serve her as her vehicle. Now in the previous story of Andhra, the husband was reborn as a buffalo and was slaughtered. Here in Jain story, can't be slaughtered, so but he does get humbled and he becomes the vehicle. Now this is the story, but 14th century, whereas such images are much earlier, and therefore this relation of canon and practice, I think we have to look at differently in the broader context of what is prevalent. Interestingly, the myth of Ambika appears to have certain similarities with the Telugu story of the goddess and the buffalo as recorded by Whitehead a century ago. In the Telugu myth, the wife commits suicide on account of caste factor, while in Ambika's story, she commits suicide on account of the factor of different religion. In both myths, there is suicide with their children and their rebirth as goddess and their husband assuming humiliatory lower position vis-a-vis herself. So this conflation, and therefore I feel that there are certain ready-mades that prevail all over, and these are used for various religions and various contexts to build a story upon. She was a Yakshi, she became. Also interesting is the fact that the Jaina canonical story of the 14th century under Ambika Devi Kalpa postdates the iconographic representation of the goddess Yakshi at least by 4 centuries. It is evident that the canon is not always a priori and that it could be considered based on a living practice. It is noteworthy that Ambika with her children is also considered a matrika. Now go back. On your left side is a 6th century image of Akota in Gujarat, where the canonical textual reference is 14th century. And then you see the other one also is a 6th century. And therefore, as I was saying right in the beginning, that we have to think about canon and practice. Okay. Both females are reborn as deities with iconographic features appearing to derive from their respective myths. Similarly, in both myths, there is a sense of upholding an ethical principle for which there is a reward of incarnating as deities. Both cases, there was a expiation, and then they are then born in their next birth. Both are similar. So this conflation of both I am talking about. The reward of incarnating as deities in their next birth. In the case of Ambika, as earlier sculptural evidence shows, she was a Yakshi of several genus, but not only later she becomes exclusively the Yakshi of Neminatha. But very early images of many of the Tirthankara, Ambika is their Yakshi. Also interesting is the fact that the Jaina canonical story of the 14th century under the Ambika Devi Kalpa postdates the iconographic representation of the goddess Yakshis at least by 4 centuries. It is, okay, in conclusion, it is noteworthy that Ambika with her children is also considered a matrika. In fact, the word Ambika or Amba means many people misunderstand that it is something to do with mango. No, it is pertaining to mother. It is noteworthy that Ambika with her children is also considered a matrika. In fact, the word Amba stands for mother. In this form of her iconography conflicts with those of Varahi, Indrani, Vaishnavi, etc. So you see, ready-made forms are there. And these are used for various iconographies. So it's not that for each time a new, but in every culture, the pre-existing forms and mythologies which act as a priori and then they are used. Mango tree to full, Ambika Devi Kalpa, she becomes instrumental in bringing a dried up mango tree to full bloom with profusion of mangoes, which echoes the concept of Salapanjika, also a tree spirit of a Yakshi whose touch brings a tree to life. After the 11th century, with the rise of Tantrism in Jain practices, Ambika, look, as early as, meaning before 14th century, the Ambika Devi Kalpa, 11th century, with the rise of Tantrism in Jaina practices, Ambika began to be further conflated with several Hindu goddesses and Jaina texts. There is a Jaina text of 11th century called Bhairava Padmavati Kalpa of Mallisena Suri, dated in 1047. Here, she is invoked, and I quote from a stanza. She is invoked as Shiva, Shankari, Chandika, meaning Ambika. Ambika is invoked as Shiva, Shankari, Chandika, Kali, Mahakali, Yogeshwari, Yaksheshwari, etc. So you see this kind of conflation happen, but we take one aspect and work towards it. But I think there's time for us to go into this and see. I'm not trying to say that this is actually but we can't leave out evidence in a given period or even given configuration of mythology. In conclusion, it may be said that when we look at the Indian goddess iconographies, we need to look beyond the limited conventional ideas of one-way traffic of canon to practice, but strive to explore beyond the static cultural milieu and the fixed templates and go into the processes of wider cultural diffusion. Thank you so much.